those pretty Lisianthus. I just rubber band them all together and put them in a little glass vase, and look how pretty they are. And we are going to talk about freshly milled flour and making bagels today. Totally off the beaten path, totally not flour related. When I did the day, well, the Friday, it's kind of like a day in the life, but Friday routine on the farm, and I kind of showed that I was making bread. I had a couple of comments about people who were interested in the freshly milled flour, so I thought I'd do a little video on that. So hope you're interested in that. Obviously, if you're not, you'll just scroll on past. So, you know, up to you. And then we'll be back to flour content next week. I'm doing some cooking with freshly milled flour. I made these cookies first. What I used was soft white wheat with the cookies. So there's a difference between soft wheat and hard wheat. Soft wheat you want to use with your cookies, pie crust, that kind of thing. Hard white you want to use with any breads that you're baking. So I used soft white and I ground those up over here into flour and then made those basically with your basic cookie recipe. And then now what I'm doing is I just ground up hard white and hard red. They're two different kinds. Hard red will give you a more nutty flavor, and then hard white is a more bland flavor. And I usually mix those two. Also, there's also an Ezekiel mix. I don't know if I'll go into that, but anyway, I'm out of Ezekiel mix. So anyway, so I had to use hard red and hard white, and I'm going to make bagels. So I thought that would be kind of interesting to video the bagel making. And I'm making a double batch because I like to freeze them, because if I'm making one, I might as well make two, and then we'll have them for a while. So I've got that going on over here. This batch of cookies just came out of the oven, and I'm baking these cookies while I'm making the bagel dough. So then the bagel dough has to rise, and then I can make those into bagels. Here is what all my flour looks like, just your normal flour. But when you mill it yourself, you're not taking out the bran and the germ, which is where most of your nutrients lie. And just so you know, I'm going to read it out of this book. This is where I get most of my recipes from, right here by Sue Becker. And I found it earlier. This is according to the USDA's nutrient database. Compared to commercially processed whole wheat flour, freshly ground hard red wheat flour has twice the amount of calcium and phosphorus, twice the amount of crucial vitamin B, niacin, B3, and thiamine, B1, and nearly twice the riboflavin, B2. It also has 3 times the iron and 4 times the potassium. So it shows that homegrown flour is far superior nutritionally to the commercially milled whole wheat flour. And again, I just read that from this book. My cookies all cooling over here on the cookie cooling rack. Now over here I'm going to start making my bagel dough. So I've combined in here the water, the honey, and the salt already, and I've mixed that up. Obviously I've made the flour, and then I'm going to put half the flour in there along with the 2 tablespoons of yeast. I'm going to mix that all up. Then I'm going to add the rest of the flour until the dough looks about right. Then I'm going to knead it in the mixer for about 8 to 10 minutes. And then after that, I'm going to cover it, let it rise until it's about double. And then that's the time that I actually make the bagels. And then I have to boil the bagels and then bake the bagels, but I'll show you that later. So I keep my yeast, I get a whole bag of it. It's instant yeast. I keep it in the refrigerator to keep it, in the freezer to keep it fresh. And I have it in a glass jar, so that's what this is. Now I'm gonna add the rest of my flour until my dough looks kind of good. I don't know how else to describe it. More cookies cooling over here. Some already in the jar, some over there. And then as you saw, this is the bagel dough. And so I'm gonna put a lid on my mixer, set it over here in the warm environment, and then let it rise until it's double its size. It's really important that you mill your wheat berries right before you use the flour. So wheat berries can last forever and ever and ever. You just keep them in their container, keep them sealed so you keep the moisture and the bugs out, and it can last forever. But once you mill it into flour, it doesn't last forever and ever. The bran and the germ will start oxidizing as soon as you mill it, and then the nutrient value goes down fairly quickly after you mill the flour. So because it starts to oxidize. And oxidation is just like when you cut an apple and you have it for a little while and then it starts turning brown. That's oxidation. I always just mill my flour right before I make anything. And I use this basic recipe that 1 cup of berries, the wheat berries, once you mill it, becomes 1.5 cups of flour. So I just kind of use that ratio. And then sometimes it makes more flour than that, and I don't need all the flour that I've made. So like today, this is the flour I have left over from making the bagels. And so what I do with that is I have a little bag, and I just put my extra flour in this bag, and then I put it in the freezer. Now, I don't really use this for making, you can, and I have. So let's just say I was making cookies and I needed a 1/2 cup more flour. Then I'd go in there and I'd get a 1/2 cup more out of this instead of just making more. Mostly what I use this flour for is in your recipes that call for making gravy or just, all those recipes that you just need a little extra flour for. I always go to my freezer and I have flour because of the leftover flour from things that I've made. That's usually what I use this for. So this is how I store my flour. I tend to buy it in the 5-gallon buckets like you see here. And then also those Flour Farmers, once I've used my buckets, that becomes a perfect harvesting bucket. Side note. Anyway, and then I put the Gamma lids on top because they're easy to get in and out of. This is hard white wheat berries. And then this one back here is hard red, and this one is soft white. So really between all of these, they look about the same. Last batch of cookies coming out, and then I've got the bagels rising. So while the bagels are rising, yep, mess. So I'm gonna clean up this mess a little bit. That looks a bit better, don't you think? Okay, can you see that the lid right here has risen off of this? That's how I know that my dough has risen enough and it's time to make the bagels. This is just olive oil instead of flour to make it not stick on here. All right, here is all my dough. Use my little scraper to get it off the sides. Alright, and I always put a little on my hands so it doesn't get stuck. And then I do knead it a little bit. Alright, what you'll find about me is these are just for us. I'm not going to try and make them exact. So I use my little circles here the best I can. Kind of make it into a little circle. There's a bunch of different ways. This is how I have come up with to make my bagels. This is not how everybody does it. This is how I do it. I make a ball. I poke a hole in the middle. I do this. Put it over here. Now that I've made the bagels, what I've done, I put some honey in the water because that's what my recipe tells me to do. And I am going to boil the bagels. I start with the oldest ones that I've made. I can fit 4 bagels in my pot at a time. And you boil each side for 30 seconds. And you boil one side, flip them, boil the other side, put them on here, and I do all of that for all of these, and then I put them in the oven and I bake them for 20 minutes because that's what my recipe says. I am using, again, a Bread Baker's recipe. It is out of an older book that they have. It might still be in that other book. I don't know. They call it their red book. This is the one, and that's actually the book I get my bread, the recipe book that I get my bread recipe out of too. So I don't know. Just started with that one, and that's what I use. I just have this. It was on the hot surface, so I'm gonna flip it. Flip each one. And then boil the other side for 30 seconds. Like I said, take it out here. So this is technically your second rise for the bagels. When you're doing your bread, you have a first rise and a second rise. Still hot. So I take my bagel out, put it on my pan, and see how fluffy it is when it comes out. Much fluffier than when it went in. And then 4 more go in. 1. I have boiled all my bagels. They're ready to go in the oven. We're gonna bake them for about 20 minutes and then they'll be done. All right, so the bagels are out of the oven and they're looking good. They're a little bit inconsistent because my oven is a little bit inconsistent as far as this one's done more than that one, but what can you do? I usually slice my bagels before I freeze them. It's just easier to eat, I think. You can obviously not do that and then slice them as you go. I also slice my bread right after, well, after it cools. I do grind my own wheat berries to make flour, which I then make into bread, and it has a lot of health benefits. So I have my bread kneading. And then I'm gonna let it rise. While it rises, I'm gonna eat lunch finally, and then and 2 loaves of bread made. I use a lot of honey because my bread recipe requires honey, so I buy honey in big jars like this. I make 2 bread loaves at a time, like I showed before, and then I put one in the freezer and one out, and then when that one's done, I just take that one out of the freezer, and then while we're eating that one, I go ahead and make 2 more. So really during this time of the year when we're super busy, I try to have more than 2 in the freezer, but I've just been real busy lately and I haven't been able to have more than 1 in the freezer at a time. So I pretty much just use the recipe book that I showed you, which is this one by Sue Becker, and I get most of my products from Bread Beckers, which I can tag them below. There are lots of places other than me. I've only been doing this, only found out about this freshly milled flour a couple years ago from my friend Sharon. Thank you so much, Sharon. Bob, I don't know if he thinks you know, I'm just kidding. But I found out about this, read up on it. Sharon and I and another friend of ours, Cassie's, we did actually go to Bread Beckers, took a class, that kind of thing, and just kind of text back and forth, have a little text group when we all have questions about certain things. So, you know, it is a little bit of a learning curve, but it's not too bad. And what we do is we use the Bread Becker Co-op. There's a co-op around us, and that way we can save on shipping and some of our, for some of the wheat berries and things like that. It does save you a little bit of money that way to join the co-op and have things. That way your shipping is much less. But Bread Beckers actually does have really good prices. I've looked around on Amazon and different things, and everything I've gotten there has been really good, high quality. The wheat berries have always been clean and everything. So I recommend that. There are much better channels than mine. I pretty much do flours. There's much better channels than mine to really look into, and they'll show you better things. I hope you enjoyed the non-flour content this week. We'll be back to flour content next week. And if you made it this far and you have any questions about all of this, again, drop your comments down below. If I can answer them, I will. If not, again, I'll try to find some resources for you. There are definitely better channels that have a lot more information than I do, but I have done some research on the subject and just feel that this is the best thing for us. So just thought I'd share.